Hi everyone, can you get to your seats, grab your coffee and get to your seats. We are about to start right now. And I'm going to hand it off to the moderator, Christina O'Connell from ECO, or As You Sow. No, SumOfUs. Excuse me, my bad.
That's what to me is early today for a conversation about the role of big tech, disinformation, and ESG. As a community working for decades to bring positive impacts to our world, the work of ICCR and each of you has been so valuable, and there have been so many amazing wins. Yet we all can see an increase of rollbacks and setbacks to the work that we've done and are doing, the growth of a culture of outrage, the normalization of hate speech, the attacks on our trans and non-binary community, and the campaign to block the progress of SRI in the anti-ESG campaign are discouraging and alarming. Today, what we'd like to talk about are the ways in which big tech, the social media platforms, which have been considered so frequently clean tech, or considered a great inclusion in an SRI or ESG fund, are not so clean after all. We're really lucky to have a great team of panelists to talk with today. We'd like to begin by looking at how these platforms stoke the outrage and undermine progressive efforts, something Frances Haugen has seen from the inside and has exposed in such a powerful way. Following Frances, we'll have Katie Paul, who will speak about, sort of give us a status update on where we are today in these areas of the spread of disinformation. And then we'll finish up with Nandini Jami, who will talk about how even non-tech companies are involved in this process through the monetization of hate speech and other disinformation and problematic speech. At the end, Anita Dort, who you all know, will be talking to us a bit about the investor sort of perspective on these topics. And then we'll have a chance to have some questions and answers together. So each of the panelists will give you a quick intro as they start, and I'll pass to Frances.
Good morning. My name is Frances Haugen, and some of you may know me as the Facebook whistleblower. Can you hear me? Are we good? Yeah. Good. You may know me as the Facebook whistleblower. In the fall of 2021, a large wave of reporting emanated from about 150 news outlets around the world. I had brought out 22,000 pages of documents for the SEC and Congress, and beginning with reporting in the Wall Street Journal and flowing on to an international consortium of other journalists, it was exposed that Facebook knew that choices it made to better its business had side effects that were incredibly costly for the rest of society. One of the reasons I'm so excited to speak with you guys today is that I believe that the investment community plays an incredible role in providing oversight for companies. Right now, Facebook has been exempted from that oversight because Mark Zuckerberg holds over 50% of all the voting shares. As a result of not having any accountability to his board, to the shareholders, or other external checks, a culture is formed inside of Facebook that is incredibly, it's become set. It's become fixed in its ways, because the way you get to be close to Mark is by telling Mark things he wants to hear. All of us, when we become disconnected from reality, when we no longer have feedback loops, we can begin to veer into our own kind of version of reality and away from the consensus reality. The cost of that has been incredibly costly. One of the major revelations I brought out is about something I call algorithmic escalation. The idea that when you have algorithms that are optimized for engagement, for getting people to click on things, for getting people to put comments on things, that process ends up biasing over time towards more and more extreme content. Documents in my disclosures said things like publishers had started noticing that the articles that drove the most traffic back to their site, like BuzzFeed. The CEO of BuzzFeed wrote to Facebook specifically saying, when we look at our traffic stats, some of the content we're most ashamed of is the content we get the most traffic back from. We think there's something wrong with your algorithm. Political parties on the left and the right in Europe said, hey, we know you changed the algorithm. This was back in 2018. We know you changed the algorithm. It used to be that we could share something that was important, but maybe not the most exciting, something like a white paper on our agricultural policy. And it's not like it got the most comments. We could see that, or the reshares. But we could see from looking at the stats that people spent time with it, people read it. Now we're forced into a really, really hard choice, which is we're social media managers. Our job is to get the positions of our party out there. But what we find is that the only thing that Facebook will distribute is content that's even, that we know our constituents aren't fond of. These extreme positions, the things that can get the clicks, get the comments, that can rile up our anger, those are the ones that get the most distribution. And we're forced to choose between content that we know our constituents believe in and content that we know will get distributed. That's incredibly, incredibly problematic. You have a system that has no oversight, where a single man can step in and do basically anything he wants and have no accountability. I'll give you an example of a concrete application of this. In the fall of 2019, a few months after I started joining Facebook, I watched this unilateral action in power in a way that was incredibly frightening. So back in the spring of 2019, the BJP party in India had begun to use rhetoric that was incredibly inflammatory towards Muslims. They had started to compare Muslims to pests, rodents, insects, that kind of thing. And Facebook had on staff back then, many of them I'm pretty sure are fired now. They had many people on staff back then who were specialists at atrocity studies. Where do genocides come from? Where does ethnic violence come from? And one of the key first steps is when major political leaders, people like the head of a country, start describing their minorities in terms of being, pests. And so a war room was called, and people asked, they were like, that we need to be able to take down speech that could endanger people. And it went all the way up to Sheryl Sandberg, and they presented it. They presented all the academic context on this kind of thing, how these escalations happen. And they came to agreement that they needed to take down the speech from Modi. But Sheryl had to leave the room for 15 minutes. And while she left the room to go deal with something else, the conversation moved on. And someone pointed out that if they took down speech from Modi, when Trump inevitably compared, say, Mexican Americans to some form of insects, they would have to take down speech for him too. And so they took a step back. They said, let's do this more rigorously. Let's do this defensively. And they spent 3 months, 4 months. They spent all the way until September, actively tweaking, having 30 or 40 researchers, people with PhDs, people from the ads team, people from the operations team, people from policy, all across the Facebook, this consortium work together to come up with what should the political the violent speech policy be. And they brought it to Mark. Now think about this. Think of how many hours of effort from experts went into this. And Mark said, this won't do. I can write the political speech policy this weekend. And he went home and he spent the weekend and he wrote up the policy and he came back. And on Monday or Tuesday, they announced, Facebook will not take down speech from politicians. And one, think about how problematic this is from a governance perspective. Like a single man can override conscientious, thoughtful work from people who know far more about the topic than him, just because he got lucky when he was 19. But second, it was so reckless, it didn't consult the ads team or the misinformation team. Politicians, as it's termed in the policy, were people who were elected. Guess what? Local dog catchers are sometimes elected. Is their speech politically protected? There was no way to actually enforce the policy because there are no comprehensive databases of all the elected officials in the world. There's no thing mapping those officials to their Facebook accounts. We had members of the third-party fact-checking program, the journalists who worked with Facebook to check misinformation, quit the program over it. Because when they didn't realize that this post that Facebook had put in their queue to check was actually ineligible to be fact-checked because it was from some low-level elected official in some state. maybe some town council member, and they got strikes for being bad fact checkers as a result. They quit the program. This is a huge, huge problem. It is only going to get worse, and it's not just Facebook. These algorithms that are directing our attention, that are focusing, that are choosing what we focus on, don't exist just on Facebook. They exist on things like TikTok. And I think it's really important to take a step back and say, hey, what's the difference between Facebook and TikTok? So Facebook has run research that says, if you just respect the choices of people, so if people say, I want to get content from these people, I want to get content from these pages, these groups. If you respect their choices and give that content preference, you get less violence, less hate speech, and less nudity for free. You don't have to censor anyone. You just get it for free because you're respecting people's choices. The real place where that violence, that hate speech, that extremism sneaks in is when Facebook decides, because your friend put a comment on something, now that content should go on your feed. That because someone invited you to a group that you had never heard of before, because they start putting content from that group in your feed for 30 days. And because you wrote a comment saying, this is misinformation, they said, ooh, you like this group, and they continued giving you content. Your family and your friends are not the problem. And we have solutions that don't involve preferencing certain ideas over others to make this safer. But all of those techniques begin to fail when we talk about TikTok. TikTok's big claim to fame is its algorithm, that it doesn't matter where the content comes from in the world, it doesn't matter if you've never heard of them before, they're going to give you the thing that you want the most. And one of the things that's a little heartening about it, at least, is it seems that TikTok has a much higher willingness to take responsibility for the idea that an algorithm is a product, that they're making conscientious choices. They intentionally emphasize more happy content because they know that it attracts more users. If you have two products, one makes people happy and one makes them sad, in general, in a capitalist society, the one that makes you happy wins. But at the same time, in a product that doesn't anchor itself in giving you content from people you know, you end up in a situation where you're even more vulnerable to the choices of those algorithm designers. Right now, we don't know why we see the videos we see. There's no transparency out of TikTok. We know that in China, and remember, many of the executives, most of the leadership of TikTok still sits in China, that in China, if ideas are not advantageous to the goals of the Communist Party, that they don't get distributed. I think it's profoundly distressing, the idea that TikTok can easily influence what our media environment is. And before you take a moment and say, isn't TikTok just about funny dances? A growing percentage of all Americans get their news from TikTok. It's something like 25% of people under the age of 35. And I know that sounds crazy. It's like, how can that be? But trust me, like even I've thought about doing a news digest on TikTok. We need to have transparency on these platforms. It's very doable. And one of the ways in which investors can help is by demanding for problems that we know about. And right now, my nonprofit, Beyond the Screen, is beginning a harm mapping exercise where we are in a collaborative way working on getting a single menu that is accessible by people that we can collaboratively edit, a single list of harms, and a single list of ways, a comprehensive ways to move forward. Understanding what are the levers that might prevent or mitigate harm. And we're working on producing a list of metrics that should be the bare floor for us to have transparency into these companies. It's things like what fraction of accounts that are reported for being under 13 actually get taken off the platform? How many of those accounts exist? How many kids that the platform thinks are 14 have been on the platform for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years? Facebook has that data today. I'm sure TikTok has it. We could know, and we could publish every month how many 8-year-olds are on these, or excuse me, we could know what has been the trend over the last few years of whether or not TikTok or Facebook or any other social platform has actually been complying what it says it does by keeping children off the platforms. In closing, I want to just remind you again, this isn't a conversation about censorship. There are lots and lots of ways that we can design these products to have them be safer. But as long as the only information they have to report to the public is how much money they make, how many ads get clicked on, how fast their user growth is, they're going to keep cutting corners. And I'll end you with one quick anecdote. In the last few years, we have seen tragic violence in Ethiopia that was fanned by social media. That while the civil war raged there, extensive misinformation campaigns were run, promoting the idea of that there were certain groups in society that needed to be cleansed. And huge numbers of people died, tens of thousands of people, probably going to be directly attributed to Facebook's negligence with the platform. I've been told recently by people who are working to bring accountability for this issue that Facebook has cut the number of safety workers focusing on East Asia by half in the last 6 months. You know, it makes sense. This is their year of efficiency. Safety is a cost center. And they know that over at least the short term, especially if they don't have to tell you how many people actually support each language, or even which languages they have safety systems for. They don't have safety systems for most of the languages spoken in Ethiopia, that no one can call them out. And so we need the investor community to come in and say, hey, we think there's a systemic risk here. Without data, we can't assess whether or not your company is vulnerable. We've seen Facebook have the largest single-day drop in value twice in the last 5 years. And that's because when the lies come out, and eventually they will, the stock price goes down. Lies are liabilities. Transparency can help all companies be healthier and happier in the long run. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you, and I'm sure that there'll be lots of good questions for you as well. Next, we'll hear from Katie Paul from Tech Transparency Project.
Thank you so much. And I think Francis really set everything up perfectly, really highlighting some of the harms of these algorithms and the fact that there isn't any transparency. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Katie Paul. I'm the director of the Tech Transparency Project. And if you're not familiar with our work, TTP is an information and research hub for journalists, academics, policymakers, and members of the public that's exploring power and influence and the effects of major tech companies. Essentially, we want to give the public a seat at the table when it comes to these technology companies that dominate our everyday lives. We know there's bad content online, of course, and big tech companies often argue that they are simply a mirror to society. But TTP's research shows, and of course Francis's whistleblower documents show, that these platforms can be dangerous by design, targeting youth, amplifying extremism, and profiting in the process. We know big tech's primary revenue driver is ads, and as such, the company has looked the other way repeatedly, profiting from extremism, crime, and other real-world harms. In August, TTP found that Facebook was running ads in searches for white supremacist groups that had been banned by the platform itself. Alarmingly, this included multiple ads for Black churches. Not only has Facebook monetized searches for banned white supremacist groups, but it was essentially offering up targets for extremists, running ads for Black churches in searches for the Ku Klux Klan and other designated white supremacist groups. In September, we found that Facebook wasn't just failing to address the human smuggling issues on its platform, it was actually profiting from the failure to enforce its policies on that activity. Here you see marketplace listings for human smuggling services, and Facebook has monetized these with ads. On the far right, it actually monetized a human smuggling listing for an ad for a Meta scholarship. And Facebook it's not just that platform of Meta that is a problem. TTP's study also found that WhatsApp business accounts were being used by coyotes to coordinate with vulnerable migrants seeking to cross the border. WhatsApp business is one of the only profit-driving mechanisms for that particular platform. And there's also the company's profit from extremism. As Francis mentioned, this is something that really gets a lot of engagement on the platform. TTP found that following the insurrection, Facebook was running ads for ammo, bulletproof vests, and tactical gear alongside posts about the insurrection and suggested pages for militia groups. And despite Facebook's very public claims that it had banned militia in August 2020, and along with militarized social movements, TTP found in April 2021, months after the insurrection and nearly a year after Facebook allegedly banned militia, that it was still targeting users with an ad interest for militia. And Facebook doesn't adequately scan the ads that it does get. Despite claims that all ads go through a review process, in 2020, 2021, and 2022, we found Facebook running recruitment ads for militia. Again, the company is profiting in this process. And of course, Meta is not alone in profiting from harm. Google has repeatedly run predatory ads on its search engine for people seeking how to vote, like these findings from the recent midterm election. But these aren't the first or even the second time this has happened with Google. We warned about this issue ahead of the 2020 election. Google promised to fix the problem and stop running these ads, but unfortunately that never happened. And of course, YouTube also profits from militia content. Here we found the platform running ads on 3%er recruitment videos and monetizing creators through super chats. That means that both YouTube and militia content creators are profiting in the process. But as Frances really beautifully laid out, to continue to profit, the platforms need to keep you engaged. And to do that, they need to feed you more content, which is part of the purpose behind these recommendation algorithms. But some of these algorithms also have consequences. When it came out that there was a plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer that had been organized by individuals who met on Facebook, Facebook claimed it had been working with the FBI and removed the offending militia. But we see here, not only had that militia still been operating on the platform, Facebook's recommendation algorithms recommended yet another Michigan militia that was also involved in the plot. This is more than a week after the plot had been unveiled and been public in media. Facebook's algorithms also create content for extremists, something that is unique to this platform when it comes to big tech. TTP found that auto-generated pages exist for a range of extremist groups, from domestic hate groups like you see here with the Proud Boys. This page was actually created on January 6, 2021, as well as international designated terrorist organizations. Our recent report found that despite knowing about this issue for many years, there were still over 100 auto-generated pages for the Islamic State on the platform as of last month. Problems like the auto-generated pages issue are no longer shocking claims about platforms like Facebook. And all of the harms and ill-gotten profits mentioned in this report have been known for years now. None of these are surprises to big tech. And now that big tech companies are knowingly engaging in this activity, so it should be no surprise that trafficking and war crimes are also on the table. The trafficking of ancient artifacts, for instance, from regions in conflict is a war crime, like those from Syria to Iraq to Libya and to Afghanistan. Facebook remains one of the world's largest digital black markets for conflict antiquities. And it's not just the issue of trafficked artifacts, it's also an issue of funding extremism and conflict. Traffickers from extremist groups like ISIS and the Taliban continue to utilize the world's biggest social media platform to this day to help finance their activities. These groups operate with impunity on Facebook, in some cases even using antiquities trafficking Facebook groups to traffic grenades following the American withdrawal in Afghanistan. Yet amid all of these issues, profit, unchecked algorithms, failed moderation, we need to keep in mind that tech companies are targeting a very impressionable population with the goal of creating lifetime consumers. The important revelations from Frances's whistleblowing and the Facebook files showed a clear targeting of kids by Facebook, and they're not the only platform to do so. One of their flagship platforms for focusing on youth, Instagram, is rife with harmful content. TTP found that it only takes 2 clicks for a 14-year-old account to connect with a drug dealer, but it takes 5 clicks to actually log off of the platform, part of the fact that these platforms are dangerous by design. And TTP found videos on YouTube Kids that expose children to troubling content on the platform, like the glorification of weapons and skin bleaching instructions. YouTube Kids claims that the platform is containing carefully curated content for children from toddlers to age 12. And of course, big tech targets kids for profit too. TTP found that there was an ad experiment that we ran ahead of Facebook's changes to targeting algorithms that found kids aged 13 to 17 could be targeted for content like drugs.com, Here we're offering to throw a pill party. The ad was easily approved. Just a note, we never ran any of these ads on the platform. We canceled them before any could run. But we found them also approving ads with anorexia tips and targeting kids for extreme weight loss. Now, after this, Facebook said that it would change how advertisers can reach young people. But we found that, again, even after those changes, these ads were all approved, some of them in less than an hour. Now, this is what I like to call my quilt of disaster. And while I've discussed a sample of real-world harms, everything you see in this slide only relates to the profit-driving mechanisms of these companies. The product that the companies that keep these companies afloat and that shareholders are investing in, that product is faulty, it lacks quality control, and it even facilitates crime. And just another example of where things could be headed. This is just a sample of some of the letters from Congress to big tech platforms over the past couple years. It's a clear example that change is coming in one form or another. And what does that mean for shareholders as these companies fail to continue any sort of efforts at quality control? And not only that, but continue to lay off important teams that address these problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was fascinating and frightening. I think Nandini is now in the room, I think, and ready to speak. I can't see from here, so.
Christina, it's Anita here. I was just going to, before Nandini speaks, I thought it would be a great idea to just talk a little bit about the proposals that have been filed this year against Meta from the investor perspective. And I was going to ask Lydia Kuykendall, who is from Mercy Investments, to maybe speak very briefly about her observations on Meta and the proposals filed. And then I'll just cover some of the other issues that have been addressed by investors, including yourself, Christina, if you want to chime in after that, then hand off to Nandini. I think that might work well. Is that okay?
Wonderful. Sounds good.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Great, thanks, Anita. Is this working?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so we at Mercy, for the second year, have lead filed a human rights impact assessment, specifically on the algorithm around targeted advertising. And this is really interesting because it's gotten really as high of a vote as you can get at Meta with a non-management supported proposal. So all of you out there working on the dual class shares issue, thank you, please work harder. I think when we talk to the company, it's really interesting because they'll talk about all this great work they're doing around human rights. And they'll say, well, we've done this assessment and we have these internal policies and we have the best human rights team in the world. And they've said that to me so many times because they'll talk to me, but they won't talk to me about algorithms around their targeted advertising, which is really interesting because they did this big, beautiful human rights report that didn't touch on this issue at all. And for those of you that don't know, targeted advertising is 97% of their revenue. And they've taken a few steps retroactively to correct some of the larger problems around targeting children, around targeting around gender identity, around political affiliations. But these are all really just reacting to controversies that have popped up in the media. And they steadfastly refuse to examine the root cause of all of this, which is the algorithm that governs it. And I'm going to be super brief here, Anita, so that we don't take up too much time. But I'll end saying that I think one of the things that really stuck with me with what Frances Hogan said is that I had the exact same experience at Meta as she did. And that shouldn't happen. They shouldn't care so little about every single stakeholder, from their client to their employees, to their customers, to their investors. That's bad business when literally I have been in the room with Meta for 5 minutes and I knew they weren't going to tell me what they wanted. Frances Hogan worked with them for years and she knew she wasn't going to get what she needed there. They should at least pretend to care about somebody other than Mark Zuckerberg. And they don't. And until they do, I think we're all going to end up in this vicious cycle of, well, they'll report on exactly what they think they need to report on or what they think they're going to get caught legally if they don't report on, and nothing else. And then we'll keep finding these things out from whistleblowers, from leaks, from wherever the source of the information ends up being, but it's never going to be from Meta until investors and regulators force them to do so. So please continue to put on the pressure, and thank you to so much of you who do that already.
Thanks, Lydia. And then just a couple of other sort of proposals that have been filed with Meta, just to give the group an idea. From a governance perspective, we have proposals filed asking for a review of their audit and risk committee. So we're really trying to get them to have a effective risk management system, and so we're asking, they've put together an audit and risk oversight committee as a result of an investor request from a few years ago, but nothing has changed. So we're asking for a review of how effective that committee is. That's one of the governance issues that is being covered. A second governance issue that's covered is the issue really relating to the dual class shares, the fact that Mark Zuckerberg controls over 50% of the voting power. And really by this time, we really should be looking at sunsetting those. In addition to the human rights impact assessment that Lydia just spoke about, there is also proposals filed relating to child safety online. So touching on the issues just now as well, asking about really pretty much at the base level a child rights impact assessment, and continued push for oversight over harmful content and how that continues to be, to gain presence on the site due to the use of algorithms and the lack of judgment. And we know about the content policy that Mark wrote overnight. And so really looking for that effectively. Similar proposals have as well been filed with Alphabet and some with Amazon. Happy to talk about those later, but really wanted to hand this back to Christina and then to Nandini, to bring us into more sort of important details as we learn about tech disinformation. Christina, did you want to speak very briefly maybe about your proposals before I throw it back to Nandini?
You bet. Thanks, Anita. We are working on 4 proposals, 2 which Anita has already mentioned. We have a proposal at Meta and a proposal at Alphabet addressing the need for an assessment of the performance of the risk and audit committees at both companies, because clearly the risks are dramatic, as we've seen. We're very happy to have the one at Meta co-filing with Harrington Investments and the AFL-CIO. We're really proud of the strong support from the union movement on this issue. For the one with Alphabet, we are co-filing with Harrington, Aviva, and Nordea. So really great partners to work on these issues. We also, from some of us, and Echo, we've just changed our name. Our members have filed resolutions on human rights issues. So at Meta, we are asking for an independent, nonpartisan assessment of the political entanglements of Meta's management with the BJP and other players in the Indian government that's led to so much violence, as Francis mentioned. And the last proposal we're working on is at Alphabet. It's a refiling of our resolution from last year that received 49% of the independent vote, calling for a human rights impact assessment on the siting of data centers in human rights hotspots, in particular in Saudi Arabia, where the data center Alphabet is building will be built by and managed by Saudi Aramco, the Saudi government. So those are all ways that and ways that you can help us in calling out these issues and putting pressure on the companies on these. And these are all issues that we're working on. And I know Nandini will now be talking about the entire sort of ad tech business. And that's an area where we're hoping to put together resolutions in the coming months and for next year on the same issues. So we can all learn a lot from her. Nandini?
Am I on today? You can hear me? Okay, amazing. Well, first of all, thank you so much to Christina and Anita for inviting me to join you here today. I'm very excited. Quick note to the AV team that if possible, could we please switch the order of slides 5 and 6? If not, that's okay. So in 2016, I started a campaign to defund Breitbart News. The campaign was called Sleeping Giants, and we lost Breitbart 90% of its ad revenue within 3 months of our campaign. Thank you. They were set to make $8 million that year, and I'm not very good at math, but that's a lot of money. And we did that just by alerting advertisers to the fact that their ads are running on Breitbart. For me, this was an unpaid side hustle. I had a full-time job doing something else. I didn't know the first thing about ad tech, and we still managed to get all of that done. This was a foundational experience for me. It taught me that it is easy to move quickly, to change things, that it's possible to change the narrative of what's happening around us. And that if we work together, that we can solve the disinformation crisis. I remain fundamentally optimistic as a result of this experience. I believe that we have the tools and the playbook to surgically and methodically dismantle the disinformation economy. I'm honored to be joining you here today so that I can share some of the insights that I've learned since then. Slide. So the key insight that I want to talk to you about today is a term called the disinformation economy. You'll only hear it here because apparently I coined the term. I could have sworn it existed, but I Googled it and it didn't. So the disinformation economy, as we at Check My Ads define it, is a little bit different than what you may come to the table thinking about. I know we've been talking about Facebook and social media platforms. That's usually what we think about when we think about the disinformation economy. But that is just one side of the equation. Facebook is where Facebook amplifies disinformation, right? Facebook is where you go and you are confronted with it, and it distributes the disinformation. But that is where Facebook makes money on disinformation. That's not where the creators of disinformation make money. Now, where the creators of disinformation make money is when you click on that Facebook post or that Facebook ad, and you end up on their site on the open web, where there are a handful of ad exchanges waiting to monetize you. And those ad exchanges are partnered with other ad exchanges, who are partnered with other ad exchanges, who are partnered with ad networks, and more ad networks, and even more ad networks, and ad platforms, and companies you've never heard of. And that forms this incredibly, absurdly complex supply chain that is so complicated that nobody, not even advertisers, know where or how their ads ended up on a Breitbart or a Gateway Pundit, let alone where the hell their ads ended up. Slide, please. This is the slide, please. This is the beating heart of the disinformation economy. This is the ATM of the disinformation economy. This is where bad actors thrive, because the chaos of this supply chain nearly guarantees that no matter what they do, money comes out the other end. I want to put this into context. Pre-2010, advertisers generally knew where their ads were running. Like, they had entire teams that would, decide where ads go. But since 2010, that entire practice of knowing where your ads are running, of serving your ads, of running your ads, has been replaced entirely by this black box. And this black box is those ad exchanges and those middlemen that I just mentioned. And they together represent a $400 to $700 billion annual digital advertising industry. And they effectively act as traffic control for all of the world's information on the internet. We've essentially handed over control to a handful of companies. And we essentially can draw a straight line between the rise of disinformation to the programmatic advertising industry. I want to be clear about that, because this all just started in 2010, around 2010. Slide, please. So this really is an issue of flow of money and the fact that we don't know where it's going. But the thing is that we have leverage. Slide, please. I just want everyone to know we have leverage. This is the big takeaway. So we know that advertisers care about where their ads go. This is a practice of brand safety. And we know that consumers care about where advertisers' ads go. And that matters a lot because advertisers have pressured the ad tech industry, their ad partners, to adopt increasingly specific language around where their ads will and will not show up. Practically every ad exchange has a supply policy with specific language around disinformation and hate and other prohibited content categories. The advertising industry has invested in brand safety frameworks, in policies. This is the number one priority for marketers. It's a thing that keeps them up at night, the idea that their ads could end up in a place like Breitbart again. And yet it keeps happening. Is there policy? Yeah, there is. But is there enforcement? No. And that is where we come in. Check My Ads is the ad tech watchdog. We are the only ad tech watchdog. And what we do is we uncover the ties between the disinformation economy and ad tech. And when we do that, we don't just publish on it, we empower marketers and we empower the public to do something about it. We actually publish emails of ad tech executives and have the public reach out to them directly. We give them the information, we give them the supply policies, we give them the language, and say, go talk to them. And that has been so powerful. One of the things that we have done differently is we're not only going by outlet, from outlet to outlet. I'm not going from the Gateway Pundit, from Breitbart to the Gateway Pundit, for example. What we've discovered is the presence of networks, of disinformation networks, and how bad actors have managed to thrive within this chaotic ad tech industry. I want to give you a quick example. Last summer, we discovered that Steve Bannon has been operating via a 24/7 streaming weather channel called Weather Nation, essentially a front for Real America's Voice, the channel that hosts Steve Bannon's War Room, Charlie Kirk, Jack Posobiec, etc. We found P&G ads running on both Weather Nation and War Room. We found Bounce sponsoring War Room. We found Tide sponsoring War Room. We published about that. We activated our audience, and we got them to drop their ads. Certainly an embarrassing moment, but a teaching moment as well. So, so what we do works. Unlike big tech, we focus on targeting the other ad tech companies that you haven't heard of because they're competitive. They are afraid of losing clients, unlike Facebook. And these companies have historically enjoyed zero accountability. They don't really have a whole lot of name recognition. People don't know who they are, and they've sort of enjoyed the fact that Facebook takes the heat while they get to make millions of dollars off of these disinformation outlets simply because no one knows how this industry or how this infrastructure works. And they've made a lot of money for disinfo, and they've also distributed a lot of money for disinfo, the kind of disinfo that ends up on Facebook. And in my experience, they absolutely panic when they hear from us. They don't want to hear from us because when we start to monitor them, advertisers pay attention and they start to ask questions, they start to request reviews, they start to request audits, and the last thing these companies want you to do is request an audit. They do not want you to know what's going on. So, previous slide, please. So what we've done here is we've turned the biggest societal problem facing us today into an acute business problem. We get results in days and weeks, sometimes hours, but certainly not years. And the name of our game here is ultimately advertising transparency. We believe that the key to an inclusive and democratic future is advertisers taking back control of their ads, simply knowing how their money is being spent and where it's going. And that is, surprisingly and shockingly, a thing that they don't have right now. Advertisers don't know where their money is going. So to dismantle the disinformation economy, I believe we have to go straight to the source, and that is the digital advertising ecosystem. Like I said, I have so many reasons to be optimistic, and I really believe that if we work together, that we can successfully, surgically, dismantle the disinformation economy. I look forward to working with some of you. Thanks. All of you, honestly.
Thank you so much, Nandini. That's really helpful, and I think that this is the type of task that we all are interested in taking on. And as we're engaged with companies outside of the tech industry, this is an issue that we can raise with them. Where are their marketing dollars? Where's their marketing budget being spent? And have they checked to see where their ads run and next to what? So we have some time happily for questions and answers. And I don't know, I can't see the room. And I know that there's also a large audience virtually. So Anita, maybe if you can see the room, you could.
Sure, I can do that. I guess anyone want to step up to the mic and ask a question? Any questions? Meredith?
I'm curious, understanding this sort of this disinformation melange. It reminds me of the commodities market where we lose the eye on the supply chain. Are there alternative business models that are trying to create that direct conduit? Like, wouldn't P&G prefer to work with a direct conduit provider? Does that make sense?
That's for me, right?
Yeah.
Ma'am, was the question, why aren't advertisers going directly to publishers?
Or why aren't there services that allow that direct relationship? Why do they have to go into sort of this soup?
Oh, that's an amazing question. That was the question that I asked when I first started researching this industry. The answer is because, well, first of all, the biggest ad exchange in the world and the easiest way to get into digital advertising, which is essentially a requirement for any small business today, is to go through Google Ads. And Google Ads, they decide where your ads go. That's the first thing. The second thing is there's a lot of, for lack of a better term, propaganda out there by the digital advertising, the ad tech industry, that the best way to advertise is through programmatic advertising, through these middlemen that supposedly helps you optimize your ad spend. We know for sure that that is not the case. I want to give you a quick example. We got our hands on a $1 million Google site list. Someone sent a site list of, they said, we accidentally spent $1 million of our clients' cash without using any of the normal brand safety filters that we normally implement. So basically, we got our hands on a site placement list of how Google spends your money when you use the default settings. And what we found was, first of all, it placed your ads on 400,000 websites, their ads on 400,000 websites. The number one placement was unknown. I'm not kidding, it literally says unknown. And then number 2 was yahoo.com. Number, I think, 18 was Breitbart. Number 40-something was Zero Hedge. And then I think like number 62 was mapquest.com. And then you go all the way down and you see the New York Times. I'm talking, you go down to 1,000 something. And in between that, content farms, piracy, et cetera. This is how Google spends your money, and advertisers don't realize that. If they knew that, I am positive they would, particularly the ones that have more leverage within the industry, would move towards those solutions. Those solutions do exist, by the way. They're just not as popular.
Rebecca, I think there was a question from the online room. If anyone else has questions as well, please just head to a mic.
Yeah, this question's from Tracy Rambert. So she points out that it took investors 4 years to get disclosures around child sexual exploitation materials online, and there's a bit of a whack-a-mole going on with regards to various topics. So her question to the speakers is, what 1 to 2 things are most important for all of us collectively to be asking for across these platforms so we don't engage in that kind of whack-a-mole advocacy? Thanks.
Maybe Frances could start.
Yeah. I think we need to have a coordinated conversation around what is the minimum basket of metrics that is necessary to have oversight over these companies. And so one of the major things that I'm working on right now is working on producing that basket, because if we could do a unified front and say like, hey, like we have fairly standardized metrics that we expect to see from, say, a car company or from any other manufacturer, then you can have a united front saying, then you're only going to the well once and saying like, here's our basket of 20 metrics, 30 metrics where we need ongoing reporting. I want to really clearly like reinforce a point, which is we don't see a ton of whistleblowers from Apple, right? Like when we compare the number of whistleblowers from Facebook and Apple, like Apple has an active disincentive to lie because they make a physical product that anyone can take apart. Like within hours of releasing any Apple product, there are YouTube videos of people who have taken that product apart and verified, yes, those components are in there that Apple claimed. We can't do that with products like Facebook or TikTok because they run on the cloud. They're opaque. And so unless investors take a step forward and say, hey, this set of information, 20, 30 metrics minimum, is what we need to just even, slightly peer behind the curtain. And I think that's the way to avoid the whack-a-mole phenomenon.
Katie, do you have some thoughts on that?
Well, one of the issues with the whack-a-mole phenomenon is also that there really isn't any accountability. There's no regulatory accountability from Congress. There's no legal liability because of the lack of regulatory liability. And as a result of that, we see these companies continuing to fail on these issues. Along with that, one of the things that we've tried to address from CTP's perspective is the repeated broken promises. These companies are putting more into their PR departments to claim that they're doing something, releasing a policy without actually putting any efforts to enforce that policy. And as Frances mentioned earlier, we're seeing mass layoffs, many of which are targeting the teams that are meant to secure these platforms, in part because they're, we're now years into these issues and there has been no accountability. There are no repercussions. So what is the incentive for a company like Meta or a company like Google? That.
Very.
In that.
I think we're breaking up.
Holders holding them accountable.
I'm sorry, Katie, I think we're breaking up here. So the sound is breaking up. I think this is certainly the need for accountability is something that we've seen in addressing the Saudi data centers with Google. Their claim of their human rights impact assessment disclosure that they say they have made referred us in their no action claim against us as well to a blog post that was somewhere on their website. And in that blog post, it mentions planning to build in Saudi Arabia, but says nothing further, aside from somewhere else in the blog post saying, we do, from time to time, we undertake studies of the human rights impacts of our work. So there's, if it's not for both, organizations, various groups like Nandini and Katie's groups and Francis's work now, or the work that we're doing as investors to put pressure on the companies to address these issues, we're not going to see them solved, and they will only get worse, I'm afraid.
Francis, Christina, there's another just follow-up question for Francis that I thought I would refer to, and then I'm going to throw it to another question on the floor, which I think Michael Connor has, correct, Michael?
Wonderful.
Just before that, I'll just Michael Passoff, who filed the proposal on child safety online, just had a follow-up question to Francis based on her comments just now. He asked if Francis has examples of what some of those standard metrics would be.
I'll give you an example. So by definition, there are no under 13-year-olds on Facebook right now, or Instagram, right? And if you don't lie and say that you're over 13, you can't get an account. Yeah, we know there's lots of 8-year-olds on Instagram. One of the things we discovered from the disclosures was that Facebook has an estimated age for every person, because the reality is adults also lie when they sign up for Facebook. And Facebook really wants to send you targeted ads for things like that 40th vacation getaway package. One of the most important things Facebook could be doing today to make Instagram and Facebook safer for kids is actually keeping under 13-year-olds off these platforms. Research has shown that the age range 10 to 13 is particularly dangerous for teenage girls, because during that, as they go through puberty, literally their brains change. They get more oxytocin, more dopamine receptors, and it makes them much more susceptible to peer pressure or peer criticism. We found from the documents that you can take that estimated age and you say, hey, for everyone you think is 14 on the platform, and guess what? You can estimate in a very precise way what someone's age is based on the content they interact with, how they interact, who their friends are, all these things. Of the kids who are 14 on the platform today, what fraction of them were on the platform 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago? And if they had to report that every month, then guess what? Once they write that query once, they could give it to us every week if they wanted. It's trivial. They already have these systems for automatically rerunning queries. Imagine what parent rights groups could do if they had even that one fact. They could say, wait, you haven't been doing a good job for the last few years at keeping kids off the platforms. And we could probably sit down together and say, what's the 30 issues we care the most about? Here's 30 metrics. Or what's the 10 most important issues? Here's 30 metrics with 3 metrics per issue. And that would actually unlock a lot of change. It allows you to do things like advertiser boycotts. It lets you do things like protests. It lets you do things like divestment campaigns. Because right now, the only successful advertiser boycott we've had was called Stop Hate for Profit, back when the Black Lives Matter riots happened. And that ended when Facebook came out and said, we solved hate speech. And because we had no way to verify that, the boycott dissolved. So even a little bit of data can be really, really transformative.
Thanks, Francis. Michael, I just wanted to, I know we're at time, but I thought it would be great for you to ask your question, and then we'll close off.
Sure, it's a little bit off point. My name is Michael Connor. I'm with Open
Can't
Mic.
hear you. Can't hear you, Michael.
Hello? Yep. I'm with Open Mic, and we work with shareholders on tech issues. Thank you. My question is for Francis. Francis, you're a whistleblower, and thank you for that. Could you talk about the experience of being a whistleblower, how Facebook has reacted to it? Is it worth it for you? Has it been worth it? Will it be worth it financially? Not that there's anything wrong with that. And the ins and outs of that, because increasingly in the tech world, whistleblowers are a real important source of information.
Yeah, I think financially it's highly unknown, right? Like I was being paid north of $650 a year, like $650,000 a year before I left, and I have not been able to draw a salary since I left. I get speaking fees, but they are not comparable. I do have a memoir coming out. Who knows if that's going to be a thing that kind of balances the scales a little bit. I've been very lucky in that I've gotten very little harassment from the public. A lot of whistleblowers, when they come out, they get a lot of blowback. Like, I think if I'd been a Twitter whistleblower, like given the rabid fans Elon Musk has, I probably would have had a very different experience. Regarding like, was it worth it? One of the things that has always been extremely heartening for me is that there's a law in Europe called the Digital Services Act, which is the first law that allows the public to ask questions of these platforms and get data. And hopefully, they're in the execution phase right now. Hopefully it's all going to go well. And numerous people who were able to pass that law said they were able to because of information from my disclosures. And so that's heartening because that's a generational level law. But the second thing is Europe didn't have any whistleblower protections prior to December 2021. So again, they've credited that the importance of the information in my disclosures made the European Union say, oh, actually whistleblowers are incredibly important for public safety. And so I like to think that if even one person is able to follow their heart because of that law, it's going to be a thing that was really worthwhile.
Super.
Thanks. Christina, back to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Anita. I want to thank everyone for being here for this panel and for the work that I'm sure we're all going to do together going forward. At ECHO, we're about to bring out 2 risk reports, one on Meta and one on Alphabet, which we'll have available next week. And so we'll share that link with ICCR so that can be shared with investors. They're investor focused. I want to thank our panelists. Nandini, thank you so much for the work you do and for the information on such a difficult area at times to understand. Katie, for taking on the really tough issues, and Francis, of course, for the work that you've done and the work that you're planning to do. Hopefully, all of us in the investment community can work with you on that, because I think that would be very, very exciting. So a final pitch to support all of our resolutions at the upcoming annual meetings. And Anita can keep you updated on all of those. There's now going to be a 15-minute break, and then sessions start again at 10:15 Eastern for System as a Strategy to Address Corporate Externalities. And I'll be joining that. Look forward to seeing everyone there. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Christina. Thanks, everyone. Thanks. Sorry about that. Let me bring it.